I'm Cody Gandy. This is Danny Ziem. Danny's going to take lead on our topic for today, which is how to maintain morale in a toxic environment. Those in the first responder world are all too familiar with that situation and trying to navigate it, which is a tough one. So we'll talk through a couple experiences and what we've seen be beneficial as Danny and I have spearheaded the first responder section here at Echelon Front the last couple of years. A couple housekeeping rules. Those that are new to Zoom, which if you're new to Zoom, I don't know how you've survived the last 2 years. With that being said, everybody sees the chat box on the side. If you have any questions that stem from what Danny and I are going to talk about, please throw those in there. Just please provide question in the forefront and then ask the question so we can navigate the chat, because the chat does get a little crazy as we do go on. If you want to provide a update from something we've talked about in the past, so last session, Jason and I talked about what to do after your first responder career. If you want to update or something you've been working through, just provide sit rep and then provide that afterwards. In addition, if you guys have anything, spear of the moment, as we're talking about, we have the virtual hand and we'll call on you after we're done talking. But just a couple of housekeeping rules as we navigate Zoom in this virtual world. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute and Danny will go ahead and kick us off. But I appreciate everybody being here.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for coming to hang out. Can everyone hear me okay? Just throw me a thumbs up. All right, I apologize in advance. I'm kind of fighting a little bit of a cold here. So if you see me or hear me muting and clearing my throat, that's what's going on. But thank you guys for taking time out of your day, out of your schedule. And I see some people here at stations and at work and in uniform. So thank you for prioritizing your career, your department, and trying to better those things and for what you guys are doing every day. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Danny Ziem. My primary background is 17 years in public service, primarily as fire, paramedics, some special operations teams, and crossing over into the law enforcement world. And it was privileged to be able to serve as a SWAT medic for a handful of years with my last agency. So it's just a small bit about me. That being said, 17 years working in the first responder world, I can relate to a lot of this negative culture, this toxic environment. And I'm here to tell you that no matter where you're at or how bad you think it is, we always look for this grass is greener on the other side. And having worked in 3 different states at 4 different agencies and being able to be privileged to go around the country and talk to agencies like Cody and myself do very frequently on engagements, unfortunately, I can tell you that no matter where you go, you're going to deal with this type of issue. And we hear this all the time. Cody and I hear this all the time. And people say, hey, listen, you don't understand. You just don't understand how toxic the environment is. I'm here to tell you that we talk a lot about people being different, but people are the same. And all of these things are relatable across the field, no matter where you're at. And burnout's a real thing, and toxicity is a real thing. And here at Echelon Front, we talk a lot about relationships being the core and the base of obviously cover and move, but obviously the base of everything that we're trying to build in culture and those types of things. And we talk about these pillars, and some of you are probably familiar with them. And the pillars to a relationship, just as a couple examples, is if you want someone to trust you, then you should give them trust. And if you want someone to respect you, then you should give them respect. But the one I want to focus on today is one of the ones that says, if you want to be able to influence somebody, then you should allow them to influence you. And that's kind of an important thing that I want to focus on. And the reason is because we can't say that or acknowledge that without saying that allowing influence over you is a choice. It is a conscious choice, whether you're going to allow a person, whether it's an individual, a group of individuals, or a toxic environment to influence you. And if we acknowledge it as a choice, then we acknowledge that we can do something about it. And the problem is we get so sucked into this environment, we get so sucked into our problems that we're not able to detach. And when we don't detach, as those of you guys that are followers know, detachment is a major piece of being able to prioritize and execute. And if you're not elevating to yourself to that detached position where you can get that kind of 10,000-foot view of the problems, of the morale issues, of the toxicity, whether it's coming from relationships or other places or politics or whatever, right? It doesn't matter what it is. If you're not detached, then you're not going to realize that choice of influence, you're actually giving away the most intrinsic piece and most intrinsic value that you have, which is the ability to influence your emotions. And that's kind of a crazy thing to think about, Because when we go through this thing called barriers to extreme ownership, and there is a whole slide deck that Jamie Cochran created, and it has now become part of our major briefs in our workshops called barriers to extreme ownership. And what those barriers to extreme ownership are is lies that we tell ourselves as to why we can't implement these principles or why we can't be effective in these manners, in these ways. But there's one of these things that we always talk about where there's very few legitimate reasons that we can tell ourselves, hey, I truly don't have control over this thing, or I wasn't there, or I truly have no impact here. It wasn't my fault. And those are very dangerous things to put out. But there's one thing we talk about that you can always have control over, that no one could ever take away from you, and that in every environment, in every problem, in every situation, you have ownership over as long as you hang on to it. And that's your response to emotional situations, your response to stressors, and how you treat people and treat situations when those things present themselves to you. And this kind of, I had like this aha moment probably about 5 years ago when I was still on the line. And as a new guy, I was a lateral. I was in my first couple years at this agency. I was well over a decade in, but a new guy nonetheless at this agency. And we had this position, and those of you that work fire or EMS or police, you know that sometimes the new guy or gal, they're going to swing quite a bit. So if they need a paramedic in another area or a rescue specialist at another area or whatever, a tactical person, they swing the low man. So I got swung to another department or to another station. And when I got there, this particular agency that I was working for, it was a pretty negative environment at the time. We had just had a change of the top leadership, Chief 1 and Chief 2 below. And we were going through negotiations with our union. For those of you that can relate to that, you know that we were kind of butting up against city councils and politics, and within each other, just conflict and people not getting on the same page and not agreeing. And the station that I was going to, I won't say the station in case somebody from my previous department is on here. This company officer actually had a reputation for kind of being difficult to work with, not very friendly. And I was like, oh man, I really don't want to go there, but I'm going to kind of go there and do the best that I can, right? Just trying to be the new guy, keep my head down, quiet, and work hard. And when I got there, I was putting my gear on the rig and doing my checks. And this company officer actually came out to the apparatus bay, and he said, hey, listen, I want to sit down and have a chat with you, because I hadn't worked with him very often. And he kind of gave me this expectations talk. And what he told me blew my mind and has stuck with me to this day. He said, hey, look, I know that things in the department are rough right now. I know that everybody's being negative. I know that everybody's angry. And I know that none of us have what we want right now at this moment. However, when you step foot in this firehouse, when you're in this environment, when you're with this crew, we don't care. And we're not going to live by that culture. We're not going to acknowledge the negativity, and we don't put up with any negative stuff in this house. And I was kind of blown away. One, because that's the first time that I realized allowing this negativity and allowing the overall impression of the agency, the overall environment to influence me was an absolute choice. Now, it was forced upon me in that particular environment because he said, hey, we're not going to do this and we're not going to allow this to happen. But it really drove home to me that that was a choice. And I'll tell you what, I actually spent 3 days there because I got held over as well. So I spent, 72 hours in this house, and we were busy. We got our teeth kicked in. It was a busy house. It's not a slow house. We're not a whole lot of downtime. But I can tell you that those 3 days stood out to me because there was no negativity. The dinner table talk, if we got to sit down, it wasn't negative. It didn't bring it down. It didn't make things terrible. And the overall feeling was much different than the other firehouses that I was in just days previous and days afterwards. But when I would go to the firehouses after that, my next shift, I went home for a couple of days and I come to the next shift, I go back to my home station or whatever. I had this like renewed energy that I realized I truly have the power to maintain my emotions. And I have the power to say whether or not I'm going to allow these things to influence me. Because when we act out in our emotions and we're not detached, like we teach here all the time, there's one of two things that's causing you to act that way. One of them probably most of you probably know right off the top, it's your ego. You're either responding out of ego or you're responding out of fear. And sometimes those things are very, very close together. because sometimes they're so closely related because you're so afraid of your ego being hurt, or you're so afraid of how you're going to be seen, or you're so afraid of the image that you're putting out, that those things become one. But when I started to realize that I can't let my ego or my fear make how I'm going to present myself and how I'm going to allow these incoming points of friction or these incoming problems to allow me to respond, that really was an empowering moment. That allowed me to truly take ownership over the situation that I was in, if not just the immediate circle around me. Now, I realize that as an individual, I can't change everything, but I can absolutely change my immediate surroundings. And that kind of brings me to the next thing that I want to talk about, which is culture. As I said, Cody and I get to go around quite a bit and talk to different agencies. And Cody, I don't know if we were up in the Chicago area recently, but it was somewhere that we were both on. And this topic kind of came up, like, and it was prefaced again with one of those, hey, you don't understand. And what this gentleman, I believe he was a captain, or it was a law enforcement agency. He was either captain or lieutenant. So he was, in the top 3 or 4. And he said, you don't understand. The environment is so toxic because the chiefs, this was a PD, because the chiefs at the top, they don't agree with what's going on. They're not on board with any of these principles. And they are just making everything miserable for everyone. And they don't get along with each other at the top. And it's creating this whole issue. And at that point, we had a chief in the room from a different agency, and he was super dialed. And I said, hey, chief, let me ask you a question related to this. How many people do you have underneath you? How many people do you have on the line in your agency? I think he said somewhere around 125. I was like, okay, so that's including him. I'm like, so you're 125th of your organization. He said, yes, sir. And I said, do you believe that you have the ability to be the rudder for that entire organization to steer where you're going? And his response was, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm here to tell you right now that your culture of your agency, if you have a toxic environment in your agency, the 1% at the top of your agency does not have the ability to set the culture and the legacy of where you're working. Now, for those of you that are chiefs and you guys are top officers or brass in your organizations, please don't take that disrespectfully. I'm not saying you're not important. So PJ, stop mean mugging me. I can see you. But here's what I am saying. The people at the top, if you're lucky, absolutely, they can help reinforce culture. They can help steer the ship. They can help get you on track if you're off track and they're super dialed. But they don't have the ability to set the tone for the entire agency. Your culture is built from the center, and your center goes up and your center goes down. Because when you think about the legacy of your department, the legacy of your agency, and how you guys operate, the new people coming in, who are they looking to for examples? They're looking for the people that are just above them, which are usually sitting in the center. And the people that have the negative attitudes that are at the top, they're going to be gone. At some point, they're going to retire. They're going to move out. So you have the center core, and I call it the center legacy, because as that legacy stays there, that's how you're confirming and you're holding to that culture. And all the new people that come in, they're learning there. And then as they get to the top, hopefully they're holding it. And if you can realize this is a legacy play, then that toxic environment can be changed in the center. Now, at the top, yes, they can set the directions for your standard written orders, for your legalities and things of that nature, and that's fine. But I really would draw a hard line between your standard operating procedures and your culture. They are not the same thing. They can be close and they can touch each other once in a while, but your culture is a big deal, and the body really sets the culture. So if you're unhappy with the culture and it's a toxic environment, there are things that you can do to change that. Cody, you got anything you want to add?
Yes, sir. And I don't see any questions right now, Danny. So I just have a couple of notes and hopefully some questions filter in. So look, my goal, Danny's taking lead on this. I'm the support on this. I simply have, hey, if Danny got sick and he wasn't able to be here, then I'm going to fill in and have my own stuff. But as he's talking, I wrote a bunch of stuff down that closely relates to what I have on my paper here. So the first one Danny talked about was in a toxic environment, being able to detach, how crucial it is. He gave a couple examples. Understand that, hey, when everything around me is going crappy and I don't detach, the things that I see typically go to the worst case scenario. So if I'm already in a bad situation and then I see something and I don't detach, I'm immediately jumping to, hey, my boss is out to get me. And I'm just literally feeling the fire, which is this toxic environment. So that detachment piece is actually crucial because if you don't, your mind, your actions immediately are going to jump to that worst case scenario, which is not going to make the situation better. It's going to make it actually worse. So that's my first point here. Second one, hey, a toxic environment. Try to pull the thread on why that exists. So there's a couple of examples I can give you. Typically, toxic environment is going to come from it's a person. So, and usually, assuming, which I hate that word, somebody from the top is doing something to the team and it's making the team feel crappy or having a toxic environment. So if it's a person, so how do I get to this person? How do I fix that problem? Because that should be the goal. A toxic environment, the goal is to remove the toxicity, whatever it is. If it's external, internal, I'm trying to solve that problem, taking extreme ownership in this and trying to fix it. So if it's a person, say I'm low on the ladder, I'm a new person, I'm a corporal, I'm a sergeant, whatever it is. And if a person is dictating the culture in my department, why is that? What is the case? When you uncover that why, that will give you the answer you need to solve the problem. Is the why this person got passed over for promotion? Is the why this person has been here for 30 years and they're not getting out and they hate their job now? What is that why? Because when you can uncover that why, then you can look at that person on, okay, I understand the why. I have the solution to my problem. Now I just need to get close enough to that person to fix that problem. This is where the hard part comes in. I have a person that is dictating the culture in my department that is making this a toxic environment. So I have Nako. Nako's a senior guy. I'm just going to pick on Nako because I know him. Nako is, he has this negative attitude towards everybody, and it is dictating and shaping and shifting the culture of our department, aka toxic. I identify that and I uncover the why. The why is Nako's been here for 30 years. He wants to get out, but he doesn't know where to go. And he's just taking it out on the rest of the team. Now, my goal is I identify that Nako's attributing to this. Now I need to get close enough to him to influence him to stop, right? There is this problem. The problem is the person. Somebody has to take that step to get close enough to this notional fire to put it out. But what we like to do, first responder military, is, hey, there's a person that doesn't get along with the rest of us. Somebody else up top needs to go solve that problem. The problem with that is that decision, that action is out of your control. Now I am hopefully just waiting for somebody else to fix this problem. Well, he's a lieutenant. He's a DC, he's a captain, whatever it is, he's a sergeant. I don't have that relationship. Well, if you don't have that relationship, go and build it. That way it gives you some power, you have some ownership in this to potentially solve that problem. The worst thing you can do is identify this problem, and now I just have this problem sitting here, and I'm looking around the room like, okay, well, is Danny going to pick it up? Is PJ going to pick it up? Is Ron going to pick it up? What if they don't pick it up? And now this problem, which is this toxic environment, is going to sit there forever. Nobody wants to be in that environment forever. We all understand that, but somebody has to take that step. So that's for a singular person. Now, if it's external, it's city council. They keep bringing these new laws in. They don't understand what we do. It's this external thing. For some reason, military first responders, we love to blame external factors for the lives that we have. Here's the problem with that. Those external things we typically have no control over, but we like to, excuse my language, we like to bitch and complain about these external things when you have no power or nothing you can do with that situation. Therefore, you can't fix anything because that is external. What can you focus on? And that is yourself. That is your team. The more you focus on these things you can't control, the less you can focus on things you actually can control, which to Danny's point is your attitude, which is your mindset, which directly relates to, hey, how we fix this toxic mentality in the culture of our department. Uncovering that why is huge. Last thing I'll say, Danny, regardless of who you are, if you're the chief all the way down to the probie, you're still in the FTX program. Hey, if I'm in a toxic environment, I can either attribute to that problem or I can start to take away from it.
I heard them change, but I really haven't been paying attention.
Not paying attention. Okay, I guess I need to
make
this a little more practical.
Everyone, go ahead and mute yourselves if you can.
Regardless of who you are in the organization, the key to fixing a toxic culture, a toxic environment is setting the example. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't have this influence because I'm brand new. I've only been here for a year, or I just lateral. I don't know anybody. I don't have these relationships. Don't underestimate the power you have as an individual on what you do and what you don't do, what you say and what you don't say. Every single day, everybody around you is watching what you do. That goes from the chief all the way down to the brand new person. You are being watched and you are being judged by what you do. And if I have good relationships and I have influence over the department, if I do the wrong thing, what do you think everybody else is going to do? They're going to do that same thing. They're going to think that it's okay to badmouth the boss. They're going to think it's okay to blame all these external things and be miserable. They're looking at you. And when you do the wrong thing and say the wrong thing, or don't step up and say anything, you are just setting the stage for them to follow in your steps. Don't be naive in these situations that you're in. Everybody here, especially everybody here, because you are here to cultivate some change. People are watching and waiting to see what you do. Don't underestimate the value that you have. I'll tie that back to an example that I had in the Marine Corps in a toxic environment. So if it's a person external, we talk about those things. And sometimes our leadership, they do something that's extremely outrageous. So in the Marine Corps, I had, my boss's boss, he did something unethical, illegal. It was not good. I'm not going to dive into the details because even though the Marine Corps is a big organization, it's not as big as we think. This boss did something that was egregious. It was not good. And he needed to get fired. He needed to go out, but this is an officer, which takes some big moves above my pay grade to get him out. And it wasn't happening. So you had this person that created a toxic environment by something that he did to one of the Marines on my team. And he stayed there. Just because he did something, just because your boss says something, doesn't mean he needs to dictate how you conform on every single day. This person took it out on our platoon, like to the fullest extent, because we went to our leadership and voiced our opinions on, hey, this person is not capable. They did something illegal. They need to get removed. And he caught wind of this and he took it out on the platoon. It created a extremely unique dynamic because the problem was still there. He didn't get removed. He stayed on top of us and he dictated and managed and created a very hostile environment. The thing I love about the Marine Corps, and Danny talked about this, the culture, hey, culture, 100% I agree with. It comes from that center out. Hey, Marine Corps has a very good culture, because you think about strictly numbers, how many subordinate troops are there in terms of leadership, it outweighs it. So understanding how much influence you have on a ground level is huge, because what this one person was doing wasn't going to affect what we did. And yeah, sure, we were in a crappy environment, but the nice thing about being in the military, being a first responder, hey, misery loves company. And if we can band together and build this camaraderie out, yeah, the boss is still here, but he's not going to dictate how we feel. If you think about it, that's all we're talking about, is you are letting another person dictate how you feel. That's bad. That's weak. Don't let that creep in. What you can do is identify this problem. Hey, I'm going to get with my teammates, my peers, and I'm going to control this outcome by not letting them get into my head, not letting them dictate what I do. I'm going to take ownership of this by saying, you know what, no factor. And sure, is it going to suck? Are there going to be some things that you're pissed off that they do? Absolutely. But the worst thing you can do is you tribute to this problem by bad-mouthing, by making the situation worse. That's just example that I can pull from, my time in the Marine Corps. We hear these examples all the time, but I know we have a bunch of questions in here, so I'm going to stop talking.
I'll let you filter through some of those questions. I just want to touch on one more thing while you're kind of getting those lined up, if that's cool.
Yep.
The other thing we hear a lot is that I'm a low man on the totem pole, or I don't have the ability to have the influence because I need to be quiet. I need to not ruffle the feathers or rock the boat. And I'm here to tell you that the power of relationships can absolutely supersede the amount of influence that you think that you have when you get into that. Just a quick example as Cody looks at these questions. One of the agencies, just to give you an idea of how bad off this agency was, I didn't even apply at this agency. I actually tested at a neighbor agency, and I was waiting for results when a couple of the guys that tested there basically had went back and talked to some people and said, hey, there's a guy from another state that might be a good fit here. So they called me and said, hey, are you interested in working here? I didn't even know who they were at that time, but I was looking to get to the state that I'm currently in. And I was like, yeah, hey, I'm, no ego here. Let's do it. I get to this department and it is so toxic, because for those of you that know how like a special tax district is set up, we had commissioners that were over the fire department at the time. Then, of course, you have the chiefs within the agency. Then we had the union, the professional firefighters, and it was a combo department. So they had the union, then they had the association of the part-time firefighters that were not in the full-time union. So you had basically 4 different silos working against us. And it was so negative that when I got there everyone hated each other. The commissioners hated the union, but they liked the association. The union hated the commissioners and hated the chiefs, the number 1 and number 2. The association hated everybody because they were just getting crapped on from all different angles. And it was so bad that when I got there, the union president had just gotten a job at another agency. So they, what's the word? They recommended me, or I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but they were like, hey, you're the president now. I had been there for like 3 weeks. And I'm like, what? There's no way. They're like, yep, nominated. That's what I'm looking for. They're like, nope, we're nominated. We all agree. And I'm like, okay, fine. So I'm a brand new guy on probation, been here 3 weeks. And now I have to go walk into Chief One's office as the probie and say, I need to talk to you about negotiations. I want to talk about being in an awkward position. But here's the unique thing. I had no bad blood. I had a fresh perspective, and I had no negative intentions, and I had nothing else holding on to. So I went to that chief, and this is before I was even tied in with Echelon Front, and I knew I needed to build this relationship. I didn't know the exact words from EF and all that, but I knew that there was relationships that were damaged. So I go and I said, hey, chief, this is kind of awkward for me because you just hired me, but somehow they just made me the president of the local. So I want to come and sit down and see what you need from me. And he was kind of blown away, first of all, that a probie was coming in to actually sit in his office. And second of all, that I was like, hey, look, I understand there's bad blood here, but I don't have any of that. And I understand that I wasn't here. Technically, I couldn't have had any say in what happened prior to me, but it is my responsibility now. It is my problem now. And I have to take ownership. Of course, I wasn't using those terms at that time, but of what we can do here. So basically I said, hey, what do you need from us? What do we need to do to repair? By the end of about a 2-hour conversation on my day off, that chief was providing me with information, backdoor information on negotiations, budgets, money that was there, all these types of things, because I strictly told him, hey, I understand your position. I understand you can't put your neck out for us. And when we go into these meetings, I don't expect you to, run a parade for us and stomp your feet and get mad, because I understand you have to, maintain your position. But simply by approaching that person and building a relationship, I was able to walk into these meetings as a brand new person, expose some things that were being done incorrectly, educate some other people on the commission, realizing that they really didn't understand what we were doing and what we needed. One of the commissioners didn't realize that we had to bring water to fires in our apparatus, is how far off this guy was, literally. So I was like, hey, look, that's our fault. We should be explaining to you what we need. We were able to open up negotiations. We were able to set some things right. And I actually didn't even stay at that department very long, because I got the offer from the agency I really wanted to go to about 4 months later. And I'm not saying I made the difference. All I did was help repair a relationship, and then I kind of stepped out. And here we are 6 years later, they're doing fantastic because of just some of those barriers and some of those leaders that were able to kind of get together on the same page, because that alignment was never there, because there was egos and fear and all those things involved that I talked about earlier. So don't think that just because you're a low man or a low gal on the totem pole that you can't have influence. Really, you step out, and if you work on those relationships, sometimes that's all it takes to be able to break that cycle of toxicity.